here's some of the things we do to teach this stuff. We try to help you understand the dynamics and trade-offs behind testing. We like to teach the epistemology of testing. Epistemology is a fancy word. It just means, how do you know what you know? So we say, for instance, that when you run a test and it doesn't fail, that doesn't mean that the product is a high quality product. It means you haven't yet seen it fail. Not yet failed is not the same thing as high quality. That fundamental asymmetry we must always keep in mind. I cannot prove that there are no bugs in the product. So I'm not proving that it's a good product when I run a test and don't see a failure. What I'm doing is I'm determining that a product can work when I run a test and I don't find a problem. That just shows me it can work. But does it show me that it will work in all the situations that I need it to work? No. Now, if I run a lot of different kinds of tests, I will build a case. I'll build sufficient evidence that we will say it probably will work. We feel pretty good about it working, and we have a good basis of evidence to think it will work. That's still not the same thing as proving that it works. When I teach, I use the Socratic approach, among other approaches, but the Socratic approach is something that we try to use a lot in our classes. And the Socratic approach is one where I ask you a question and then you give an answer, and then I'll just ask you a harder question about your answer. And then I'll ask you an even harder question about your answer until you have a breakdown. Not an emotional breakdown, I hope, but you get confused and you say, I don't know what to do. And then at that point, that's where I've reached the place where I can teach you something. And we examine that. So sometimes I go through these Socratic exercises and people get a little upset. And so I have to take care of their feelings a little bit. Sometimes they get discouraged and I need to encourage them. That's the job of a teacher. But the reason we do Socratic discussion is the same reason that Socratic discussion is used in law school to teach lawyers, because you have to learn the tacit knowledge of how to think, how to analyze things. You can only do that through practice. Practice under a certain amount of pressure and supervision. We use a lot of heuristics too. I've showed this word a couple of times. Let me define what I mean by heuristic. A heuristic is a fallible means of solving a problem. That's all. That's all it means. It's a way of solving a problem, and it might not work. Anytime you have a way of solving a problem and it's not guaranteed to work, it's a heuristic. If it is guaranteed to work, then it's an algorithm, I suppose. But a heuristic, if it's not guaranteed, we are surrounded by heuristics in our lives. You might wonder, why am I making a big deal about this? Why talk about heuristics? So what? So you have these things that can help you, but they might not help you. What's the big deal? The big deal is if you know you're using heuristics, then you know you have to be awake, alert, and competent so that you can see if they are failing or not failing. In other words, as soon as I offer you a heuristic, I'm offering you a way to hurt yourself, and you need wisdom so that you don't hurt yourself. A chainsaw is a heuristic for cutting down trees. Might not work. You might cut yourself instead of the tree. The tree might fall on you. I bought a chainsaw years ago, and I had never bought a chainsaw before. And when the guy at the hardware store found out that I had never bought a chainsaw before, he refused to sell it to me until I had watched the chainsaw safety video. So I sat down in his shop and I watched the video of how not to kill yourself with a chainsaw. Then he said, okay, come out behind the store and I've got some logs here and I want to see you use the chainsaw safely. So I cut some things with the chainsaw and he decided, okay, I'll sell you the chainsaw now. And that's how I got the chainsaw. That is how we should interact with heuristics. Notice how this is different from the way best practices are talked about. With best practices, people say, shut up and do it. Shut up and do it. This is a best practice. Just do it. They don't say, hey, this best practice might go horribly wrong. And you have to be smart and you have to be knowledgeable and you have to be on your toes or else it'll go horribly wrong. But with heuristics, that's the way it is. So everything that I teach with the understanding that it can all go wrong and you need to be ready for that. And you need to be ready to use different heuristics if the first one goes wrong. To do that, you need to understand these heuristics. If you don't understand them, you cannot be responsible. You see how it's all fitting together, the responsibility, the wisdom, the heuristics, it all hooks together. And I hope you start noticing that this isn't just about testing. It's about how we live our lives as humans. Just as in testing, there are no best practices, there are also no best practices in life. And again, any parent, especially of teenagers, knows I'm right because you know you've faced challenges where there was no clear right thing to do when your child wants to do some terrible, dangerous thing and you want to stop them. But you know, if you try to stop them directly, they'll just do it anyway. They'll do it secretly. And so you've got to do it a different way. What I did with my son is I did what my father did with me. When I was 15, I started drinking and I got drunk a few times. And my father found out. Now, my father didn't live with me, but he found out because my sister told him. And he called me. And here's what he said to me. He said, James, you're free to do anything you want with your life. You're free to drink. You're free to do drugs, do dangerous things. It's up to you. But I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what'll happen. And I'm so worried about you. And I wonder if you'll consider not drinking anymore so I don't have to be afraid all the time. And I said, sure, Dad, because it was the first time my father had ever asked me for anything. And it was my first chance to give my father something. And at that point, I wasn't attached to drinking. I just was at a couple of parties and he heard that I drank too much. And I never even had a hangover. I wasn't, I was at the beginning of my career as an alcoholic. And he stopped it. He stopped it without using one little iota of authority. He had no authority that I recognized, but he didn't use authority. He used my desire to please him, but not really to please him. It was my desire not to hurt him that made me go, okay, Dad, it's a small thing. And I didn't take a drop of alcohol except on my 21st birthday for the next 8 years. And then I realized I can drink if I want to. But by then, drinking was not important to me. I wasn't hanging out with anyone who did drinking. So to this day, I barely have any alcohol. There's no alcohol in my house. So once in a while, socially, I'll have some wine or something, but it's not important to me. But it was important to me to be with my friends at that time of my life. So I have a feeling that I'm the only alcoholic in the world who has never had and been drunk ever in his whole life. But I have a feeling I could very well have been an alcoholic if my father hadn't done that very gentle thing. He led without attempting to dominate me. So I try to do that with my son, and it has worked wonderfully with my son. Very comfortably and peacefully together. Because he knows ultimately whatever he wants to do, I support it. But he's concerned about how I feel about what he's doing. You see, I got him hooked. He cares how I feel. So I don't have to exert the tiniest little influence, and it's enough. Okay, so it all ties in heuristics, responsibility, wisdom, also making mistakes. We make mistakes and we learn from them. My first boss at Apple Computer was so formative for me, was so important because he said, I don't care if you make mistakes, James, as long as you learn from them. And that was tested. It was tested because I accidentally almost caused a strike at Apple Computer in 1989. I accidentally almost caused the shutdown of all Macintosh production in the United States because I went on a factory tour and I was joking. I was making jokes about all the things that I saw, and they turned out it was really offensive to the people on the factory. They heard me, what I was saying. I said it looked like they were slaves. They had these anti-static cords that were around their wrists on the assembly line. And I said it looked like they were chained to the assembly line. What I didn't know is they felt like they were slaves. They felt like they were chained to the assembly line. And I didn't know they felt that way, but from their point of view, I was rubbing it in. And so the next day there were posters up all over Apple Computer trying to find who it was yesterday who was making all these offensive comments. They didn't know who it was. But I come into work and there's posters like wanted posters. And I knew they're looking for me. So what do? I went right to my office and I wrote a long apology letter and I sent it to my boss and my boss's boss and my boss's boss's boss. I sent it to everybody I could find. And the reason I did that is I said, well, my boss said I can make mistakes as long as I learn from them. So I guess this is one of those things. And it worked. It absolutely worked. My performance review was 2 months after that, and there wasn't a word about this on my performance review. And when that happened, I said, oh, I guess my boss was serious. And it created loyalty in me. It created trust in me. But on the day it happened, I almost fainted with embarrassment, and my friends were teasing me all day. And somebody said, James, it feels terrible today, but a few years from now, this will be just a funny joke. This will be a funny story that you'll tell people. And indeed, I've been telling this story to people for years and years and years. It's a very helpful teaching story for people to hear this. It's those I've got lots of these stories. I've made some big mistakes in my professional life. I was fired once after 90 minutes on a job. Huh? I mean, maybe some of you have been fired, but in 90 minutes or less, that's pretty hard to get fired that fast from a job. But happened to me at Texas Instruments on a consulting project in 2001. After 2 meetings, I got myself fired. Uh, I learned from that. Um, Wrote a big long letter to my teacher after that, Jerry Weinberg, and debriefed the whole thing. I've got lots and lots of failure stories. And the reason why I tell them is because every failure story is a very important building block in my learning. You might wonder at this point, hey, I thought I was coming to a thing about testing. Okay, I'm bringing it back to testing. I'll tell you this. One of the biggest ways you learn about testing is you pay attention to the bugs that you miss. Don't turn your eyes away from the bugs that you don't find, from the bugs that are found by other people after you thought you tested the product. Don't turn away from that. You learn from that. You study that. You ask yourself, where was that bug when I was testing? Why didn't I see that? And every time, every one of those incidents, it'll make you a stronger tester. And that's what you promise to your clients. You say, I can't promise I'll find every bug. What I can promise is I'll learn from everything that happens, including from every bug I do not find and that somebody finds later on. No one can make better promise than that. And in this way, you build your own heuristics. You learn your own new principles. In my classes, I try to create practical exercises that help you do all these things. And this leads to the ultimate goals of the methodology. We're trying to build self-respect, not just the ability to do the work. Everything that I do in RST is rooted in these people, these thinkers, and other people that I didn't mention, but these are the most prominent of the people that give a basis to what I'm doing. The physicist Richard Feynman. This is the guy I describe as my teacher, Jerry Weinberg. I've had many teachers, but Jerry Weinberg is the closest thing. I dropped out of high school when I was 16 because I couldn't deal with authoritarian school systems. And when I was around 28, I met Jerry Weinberg and I took all his training and he became my mentor. And what I'm doing now with people I mentor and in my teaching is I'm passing on the lessons that I learned from Jerry Weinberg. And he learned those lessons from his teachers, including the psychologist Virginia Satir and various systems theorists that taught him. And so I'm part of a tradition that I am passing on to my students. Kem Canner was like an older brother to me. I worked with him for 15 years and he contributed immensely to my work practices and the way that I teach, the way that I think about testing. So Jerry Weinberg was like a surrogate father. Kem Canner was like an elder brother. Uh, Harry Collins is like a great uncle. I've talked to him a few times. His writings on tacit knowledge and interactional expertise are fundamental to how we teach testing. My son went to a Montessori school for 6 years. And so I learned about Maria Montessori's work and I saw the teachers at the Montessori schools. And I realized the way that Montessori teachers teach, that's how I want to teach. It's very non authoritarian, very indirect. You're working with the energy of the student rather than pushing all your own agenda on them. So it's most of my work is based on Canner and Weinberg. Um, but I've come up with a lot of unique ideas. I've reworded and reworked and remixed some of their things. And then here's the other thing. I have people who've remixed my stuff. So for instance, here's a book, a Chinese book. It's a Chinese book about software testing, written by my colleague Tai Xiaomei. And I wrote the foreword to this, even though I don't read Chinese. So I'm not exactly sure what's in the book, but I'm pretty sure what's in the book because I've seen her teach. And Tai Xiaomei put together something she calls Buccaneer methodology. It's based on two different books that I wrote, but then she reworked everything and she rearranged everything and she renamed stuff. She added some new stuff in. And then now it's her thing, but it's her thing that I contributed to. I love that. I love that she did that. I hope that everybody does that with the things I teach because that's what I did with Kem Canner stuff. That's what I did with Jerry Weinberg stuff. And Harry Collins stuff is I took all this stuff and I mixed it together and I rearranged it and I renamed things. And now it's mine, but it's mine that I give to you. And what we say in rapid software testing is that when I teach you rapid software testing, you will practice your own version of it. I practice my version of it. You will practice your version of it. Your version will be a little different from mine. And maybe when I find out about your version, I'll add some of your elements into my version. Maybe there's going to be some back and forth. So I do this for money. I do this for money. I've talked to God with God's power. I want to arrange a class specifically for people in Africa who don't have the kind of money that Europeans have. I normally teach in Europe and America because that's where the money is. But I'd like to put on a class arranged by God's power. So we're talking about it. And it'll be substantially less expensive than the one I normally teach, but with comparable material. But if you want to know more about my stuff, you'll find it on satisfice.com or Michael Bolton's site, developsense.com, or the site that we maintain together called rapidsoftwaretesting.com. And then I can't resist. I have to show you this. I know it's going to embarrass somebody here, but it's okay. She's going to have to deal with it. I'm going to show you this. So this is one of my students, and she has created a portfolio. And this is all the homework that she's done for me in the last year and a half or something. I gave her these different things to test, and she has created test plans, test reports, test cases, test automation of different kinds. Well, automated checks, you know what I mean? And she's posted all this stuff here. And I thought I was, when I we were developing this, I thought I was helping her maybe get a job or something. But what I find I'm doing is I'm using this for my own marketing, because I'm saying this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, folks. I'm talking about different ways of specifying test cases. I'm talking about uh here's some test cases that are in tabular form. And then she's got test cases that are in procedural form. And there's different kinds of bug reports that she's written up in with attachments. And so all of this is demonstrating the kind of things that I'm talking about. Sometimes people say, what do these documents look like? What do these tables look like? What do these mind maps look like? And I'm just having Christina do project after project until she gets tired of learning about testing. Hopefully, she won't give up anytime soon, because it's good for the world. It's good. I think it's good for her, and it's good for me. Uh, and uh, I'm very proud of her. So, and it also helps me learn. That's the other thing, is I've developed class materials from working with my various students. That's the main way that I develop class materials, is by working with a student. And when I'm trying to figure out how to get across an idea to you, I go, oh, maybe this will work in class. And then it becomes a class exercise. All right. That's my talk.
Thank you very
Um,
much, James. I'm offended. A lot of questions will be rolling in now. We'll just pick it one after the other. So first, James, you spoke about the practical aspect of testing, right? So for
I
example,
spoke about what?
yeah, the practical aspect, using an aircraft as an example, people have
Yeah.
to actually be on the pilot seat to
Yeah.
know how to fly aircraft. You know, one of the problems we've
Yes.
had over the years is that we have a lot of people who say they trained for testing, and then they give recorded materials, tell people to go watch videos and all of that, and then they don't really do practicals. And most times, judging from the ISTQB to start with, you have
Yeah.
from first chapter to the last chapter, all theory. There's no part they will tell you to go and do practicals. And if you sit for the exam, I did before I met you, taking a couple of ISTQB exams. I'm not proud of it anymore. You have from the beginning to the ending, OBJ questions, objectives. And then most times, once you study the material and then you can choose between A or B, you pass and you're certified. And we
Yeah.
say these people are certified testers. But real
Yeah.
world scenarios really don't play out that way, especially for people who want to take testing as a serious business. Yesterday
Yeah.
on the call, I had one of the great guys in Nigeria, Chibuzo, Ridwan, and the rest of them. And then they were talking about different scenarios of, I mean, health sector is the way you test in health sectors is different from the way you test in fintech, is different from the way. But ISTQB will not show you all of these things. And all of those funny trainings will not show you all of these things. They don't really tell you to say, okay, now that we have given you a manual on how to drive a car, but there will be times you will have to drive a lorry, there will be time you have to drive a sports car, and there's the time you probably ride a power bike. Please, there are different methodologies to drive these things, and there are no best way. I mean, all of it boils down to the fact that hands-on practical experience is a lot, and I'm really grateful that we have you on this call. It's a privilege to have a legend like you speak to us. I mean, to speak to us, Gen Z. They call us the Gen Z, Generation Z. So that's first. So we have a lot of questions already rolling in. Some are in my DM. I like us to touch some of them, right? So I used to tell people in the most people around me that testing is profitable. And I wanted to confirm something on the call before I move on with the questions. So I was talking with someone some time ago. I said, I watched one of James' video and he said as of 2005, he was already making $35,000 weekly uh, as a tester. And then the person said, oh, it's a lie. So I wanted to confirm that with you on the call.
I when one of the kinds of work that I do, and I love it, it's my favorite kind of work, is to test on court cases. And court cases are extremely lucrative. It's expert witness work. It's where you testify under oath about what you did when you were testing. So the most money I ever made was about $35,000 a week for 12 weeks. And I knew while I was doing it that I would never make that much money ever again. And this was 25 years ago. And so far it's been true. I've never made as much money testing
In a week.
as I did then. But another thing you have to understand is I made that money, but I had a team of 10 people and I was making money on each one of them as well. That's why it added up. It wasn't just my own hours that I was billing. So I was making $200 an hour, and then I was making $50 to $100 an hour on each of the people on the team that I was that I had. This was for a project called the Microsoft Antitrust Remedies Trial, and there was actually a there was a news story about that at the time. So if I here, this is kind of funny. I'll show you this. Um, here. So this is a news story about me. Microsoft judge indicates tendency to require big change in Windows. This is from May 8th, 2002. And look, it says James Bach, a former Microsoft employee. I was never a Microsoft employee. I was a Microsoft consultant, but then not a full-time employee. But I proved that you could remove Internet Explorer from Windows and not destroy Windows. I proved it by testing. And you know how I found out how to do it? I called Microsoft tech support and they told me how to do it. Believe it or not, Microsoft told me how to do the thing that Microsoft claimed under oath you can't possibly do. But they didn't know when I asked them that I was going to testify against them. So they just told me, like, oh, yeah, you just do this and this. So I did those things and then I tested and the operating system was stable. So I was going to show that evidence to the judge. Here's the very next. This is May 10th. Okay. So this is a few days later. Under pressure from Microsoft Corp, have dropped the last minute witness. They dropped me as a witness. They complained that my evidence was too much, that I had too much to show them, and it wasn't fair to them. That there was so much evidence and it would delay the trial, and so so they decided not to bring my evidence after all. But I took my evidence and I leaked it to the European Union, and they won their lawsuit against Microsoft. And they forced Microsoft to take Internet Explorer out because of the evidence that I leaked to them, and they reproduced my work. So they won their case, even though in the United States we didn't win the case because I wasn't able to provide my evidence. But it doesn't matter. All my work came to nothing, and all I got for 12 weeks of work was $400,000. That's it. Nothing else to show for it. But
One,
that saved my it saved my company. It allowed me to go on a cruise, buy a new car, and get out of debt temporarily. And it was a good year. 2002 was a good year. So that's what I'm talking about. But that's like the highest level of testing because you have to be recognized as an expert in your field in order for a lawyer to hire you to do expert witness testing. I've done 10 court cases. The last one I did was 7 years ago or something. I really want to do another one, but you have to wait till the lawyers call you up and say, we've got another one for you. So if anyone works for a law firm, you know who you should hire if you want to win your case. Me.
Nice one, James. So before I bring the questions, a very quick one. I've heard you say this countless times that you dropped out from school. All right.
Yeah.
Why I'm asking this question is because sometimes a lot of people think, especially the upcoming testers, they think that uh, becoming a techie or coming into tech or becoming a software tester, you probably need one qualification, one degree from computer science and all of that. Speaking from your own perspective, you are a school dropout, but a school dropout that
Yeah.
have mentored thousands of graduates, PhD holders, and all of that. So, what
Yeah.
would you say? What would you advise? Do you think academic qualification, educational background should restrain anybody from learning tech and from doing better?
In the software industry, it's I just don't see it as very important. It's and if whatever qualifications you get, you are automatically competing with all the other people who have those qualifications. So there's always lots and lots and lots of people who have those qualifications. You're you're not avoiding competition by getting degrees and certification. You're just entering a competition with all those people who have those things. But you see, I don't compete on the basis of those certifications. I compete on a different basis. I compete on the basis of the ideas that I have contributed to the industry, which give me a unique brand and a unique personality. And I am hired by the people who want that uniqueness. So it's a different kind of competition. And that's what I suggest. I suggest that you treat the work world like dating. Um uh, which is to say you're incompatible with a lot of people. You shouldn't be married to just anyone, but there's someone out there that you're perfect for. And you just have to find that person. You don't need to be hired by every company. You need to be hired by one company at a time. All you got to do is find one. So I got hired at Apple Computer, and I was the youngest manager in the R&D division at Apple Computer in 1987. I was 20 years old. There were interns that were older than me. Now, why would anyone hire a high school dropout who's that young? And the reason is a couple of reasons. One reason was that I had the perfect experience for the job because I had been doing assembly language programming for video games. So I knew how to use the developer tools, and it was a job testing developer tools. So I was using those developer tools. So I was basically a user domain expert, right? I knew about the user domain. So that's one reason why I was hired. Another reason I was hired is the guy who hired me. I didn't know this at the time, but he secretly wanted to be a psychotherapist. And he eventually left Apple and trained as a psychotherapist and now is a psychotherapist. He works with prisoners in the California state prisoner system doing therapy. He wanted a young man that would be like a Frankenstein monster that he could build. I think he wanted a project. I think he wanted to turn me, it was like It was like that movie, My Fair Lady, and I was the fair lady who was the street urchin that he wanted to turn into the elegant socialite. So I think that's the real reason he hired me. And oh, I think there's one other reason. I think he was tired of recruiting and he wanted to get somebody into that job. He thought I had potential. He thought he could coach me. He wanted someone who would want to be coached. And I was all those things. I would have chewed through a wall to work at Apple Computer. I would have done anything to work at Apple Computer. And you know what? I was 2 hours late to my interview and he still hired me. The reason I was 2 hours late is my car that I had borrowed, so I didn't own a car, broke down on the highway. And we didn't have cell phones in those days, so I couldn't call. And so it was the classic, like, I have to get to the biggest interview of my life. And then my car breaks down 5 miles away from Apple Computer after a 200-mile trip. I'm dead on the side of the road. And so I was 2 hours late, but he understood. I was also covered in sweat, I'm just, but I answered well on the interview questions that he asked me. And I think he just liked my personality. And you know what? I've learned this from doing a lot of hiring at Apple Computer and at Borland International and other companies I've been at. I've learned this about hiring. Hiring decisions are always personal. Everyone pretends they're not personal, but they're always personal. No one wants, no one will hire you if they don't like you. They'll find an excuse. They'll say you're not the most qualified person. But if they like you, they'll hire you even though you're not the most qualified person. All hiring decisions are based on emotions and personality. And so just bear that in mind. And that's why I never worry if I don't get a job, because I just figure, well, I guess I'm not the right person for them. I guess they just didn't like me. And so I don't want to work for people who don't like me. I want to work for the kind of people who want this. If you want this, I'll work for you. If you're not comfortable with this, if you want something else, then don't hire me. And you have to have hope, though. You have to have faith that there is somebody in the world for you who wants you, and then show them what you are. I mean, I did this when I was dating, when I was single. I decided that I wanted to fail fast. So I would just show who I was every time I was dating a woman. Here's who I am. Because I want them to run away from me if they don't want what I am. I don't want to string anybody along. I'm looking for long term. And then I've been married 34 years now. I've stumbled into someone who turned out was stalking me the whole time I was dating other women. She was stalking me and I didn't know it. And she finally introduced herself and we got married a few weeks later, and we've been married 34 years. So, anyway, she wanted exactly what I was, and she found me, actually. So it turned out it was someone working at Apple Computer who knew about me, but I didn't know about her. So all hiring is personal. You need to get your authentic, unique ideas, your unique energy. You need to get it out there. Post on LinkedIn, get people to know who you are. I encouraged Christina to create an online portfolio so that she could say, here's the work, here's the kind of things I've done. Because someone's going to look at that and say, I like that. I want that. And now the question is just getting people to see it, getting enough people to see it so that the right person says, ooh, this is very nice. I want that. And so she's put a huge amount of work into that. If anyone wants to compete with her, that's fine. Create your own portfolio, but it's a lot of work to create a portfolio. It takes a lot of time. So it's not easy to compete with someone who puts a portfolio of their work out on the internet in that way. Of course, there's a downside, which is people can copy her work, steal her ideas, and that sort of thing. There's always that danger.